Everyone, this is Britton LaTulip here. We're doing our weekly talk, Wednesday talk. If you're new to the group, welcome. I'm Britton. I'm the author of the Art of Raising Children for Greatness series. Some of you guys still don't know where that is or where to get that. That's mostly on Amazon. We do have it on our site, Blue Manor Education. And then there's the Academy, so it can be kind of confusing. But there's 3 books. The first book was Revealing School. The next book is Education. And then we have Character. And I'm not going to introduce it again. You can watch some of the other videos to understand what the Raising Children for Greatness movement is. But it's not just some generic slogan that we coined. It speaks to a specific style of education in the mold of the aristocracy, the kings of old, and then the elite prep schools of today. And it's achieving greatness at the highest levels. And, of course, we come from a Christian perspective, so we're trying to do this in the name of Christ, making a difference on the world scene, a great difference. Our latest book that we published is Writing Poetry. Communication is super powerful. Maybe a superpower, speaking, writing. That's how the world has changed. Writing is so important. We have Tracing the Masters, Writing Poetry, and highly recommend you look into it. I won't tell you all about it tonight, but it's so important. Oftentimes we think of poetry as the form itself, but really the practice of poetry is so important. The great orators all practiced poetry, reciting poetry, memorizing it, and writing poetry. So important because it's just about becoming a wordsmith, a master of words, making what you say sound good. It's so important that it's musical to the ear. So those are our books out right now. And of course we have Blue Manor Academy. Okay, that's it. Now tonight I want to get to our topic. We're talking about the French Revolution. And because we're talking about the French Revolution, we're talking about the New World Order, and we're going to talk about the American Revolution and all the others. It's a huge topic for tonight. And what kind of spurred this on was a few things. But one of them was the video I shared in our group from the San Francisco gay choir. And they're singing a song. It's a homosexual choir, and they're singing a song about kind of taunting Christian parents. And saying, we know that you're afraid that we're going to convert your children's or corrupt your children's. But in this one case, you're actually correct. We're going to convert your children's to this deviant sexual behavior that's God calls an abomination. It's considered a mortal sin. It's really disgusting. And it's just the way the guy, the singer, he's just gleeful. He's just smirking. He's like taking joy in the idea of corrupting our children. And it's just a really disgusting video. Just watch it. But I'm also, at the same time, I'm reading, because I'm trying to update Blue Manor Academy with historical documents and sources, which I always talk about. And I'm going through and reading them, to make sure they're good or okay for your kids. And I'm reading this one by Mary Therese Charlotte. And that's the daughter of Louis XVI. It's the only surviving child of Louis XVI who survived the revolution. They killed pretty much the rest of the family. She's actually the only surviving person of the family. And she was talking about Monster Simon. That was the person assigned to watch her little brother. He was 7 or 8 years old when Monster Simon got a hold of him. Monster is his nickname, not his real name. But how that guy just tormented this little boy. And one of the things that he did as soon as he got a hold of him, and they had separated him, put him in a little cell, this 7 or 8 year old boy, they dressed him up like a revolutionary, and they made him sing these joyous songs about killing his father and his family and destroying the aristocracy in the church. And there was just, she talks about how he was just such a wicked, hateful man, and he would actually make the little boy drink alcohol and get him drunk and stuff like that. And then he would sing these songs about massacring the church and the aristocracy and the royalty. And there was just that glee in it, the same sort of glee you saw in that gay choir singing about corrupting our children. And this is who they are. They're very evil people. They control the public schools. They enjoy it. I think that they enjoy it the most, taking Christian kids and turning them against us, against our faith, against our families and our values. And so it made me think of that. It made me think of the French Revolution. And I'm just reading this stuff, and it's so oppressive to read this stuff because she's so slandered. Like Marie Antoinette, this family's been so slandered. They love to make a mockery of her. And I'm reading this, and then I was just thinking, I was like, our family should celebrate this as a day of infamy. You know what I mean? Like a day that we will remember in infamy, the storming of Bastille, which is the start of the French Revolution. And I'm just curious, and this was like yesterday. I'm like, I wonder what that is. I look it up. I'm like, it's tomorrow. It's June 14th, and it's a Wednesday. So we'll talk about the French Revolution, and we're going to talk about how this is all one revolutionary movement, and that the American Revolution and the French Revolution are essentially the same thing, the same actors. I'm going to go through that today with you. But this is the New World Order movement. I've talked about it before. I said it started basically in 1492 when it was like the height of Christianity and then the beginning of the New World Order movement. And it's basically international bankers who fund this revolution. And these aren't independent revolutions. It's not the French Revolution and the American Revolution and the Glorious Revolution and the Spanish Revolution and the Russian Revolution and the German Revolution. These are not independent revolutions. They're taking down one country at a time. And it starts, I don't want to go to all of it, but basically it's going to start when they get kicked out of Spain, Spanish Christian Spain in 1492. And these group of bankers, they flee to the Netherlands and the New World. And they're going to eventually fund a war, and gain their independence of the Netherlands. And from there, they're going to fund a revolution and go over to England and take it over. And that was in like the 1650s, I believe, is when they finally took that country over. And that was William of Orange, the Butcher. Very vicious, very satanic, very evil man, in my opinion. He takes over the country, and then he hands over the power to the bankers. So he actually, as soon as he becomes king of England, he signs off all of his powers, basically, and he becomes what would be actually a president. So if you look at the monarchy today, it's a constitutional monarchy in England, and essentially they're like a head figure. They're kind of like the president. They don't have a ton of power. The power really rests in the parliament. And so he does that to himself. He signs that over, and then he starts the first national bank in England, the Bank of London, or the Bank of England. And it is the first time that the government would take out loans from this bank, like a fiat currency, take out loans from the bank, and then the taxpayers would pay that back. And then they're gonna fund revolutions over in France and America, and they're gonna continue to topple these countries. And that's what we're talking about today. It's really important you understand the French Revolution because it's overtly satanic. It's overtly satanic once you understand what the French Revolution. But the problem is when you went to school, they told you that it was about people. There was bread shortages, and the aristocracy and the clergy, they were just these pompous idiots spending the nation's wealth while all these people starved. And that's the image that you have. In fact, I was watching this movie. It's on Marie Antoinette with, I think it's Kirsten Dunst or something. She played it. And they show her as this kind of like sorority girl who's just totally clueless and just spending the country into oblivion, bankrupting the country. And then, of course, there's this reaction, this violent peasant uprising. That's not the true story. Marie Antoinette, if you read her writing, she's actually a very pious, devout woman. She's a great mother. She's not this silly little girl that they made her in propaganda posters. And her father, you read the writings of her father. I mean, he's very devout. He came to power. He became the king very early. He was very young. He married Marie Antoinette was 14, but he married very young. Took over the country in 1774. That's 2 years before the American Revolution. And then, of course, within about almost right away, they start trying to overturn his power and take over that country. So tonight, I just want to talk about some of the parallels between that revolution and the American Revolution, and you're going to see that it's a lot of the same actors. In fact, a lot of the Americans who fought in the American Revolution just jumped on ship and went to France and participated in that revolution. And so anyway, that's what we're talking about tonight. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the New World Order movement. So, and it's really important too because I think we just got a taste of that. I mean, we just saw what happened in the last year with Donald Trump's overthrow and this crisis, and we were on the verge of revolution. I mean, they were setting it up, but he stepped down. But I mean, we were on the cusp of it. And we saw the propaganda, just horrible propaganda, no matter what he said, no matter what he did, how he crossed his legs. Everything he did was racist and sexist and horrible and just the worst thing he could have possibly done. And that's exactly what they're going to do to Louis in the propaganda. It doesn't matter what he does. He's going to get blamed for everything that goes wrong in France. So they have that propaganda. Then you have a crisis. We just had the COVID crisis, and we had, basically the whole country get locked down. I don't know if that was manufactured. I imagine that it was. But you have that crisis. They're going to create a crisis in France with bread shortages. They're going to bankrupt France, and it's all going to get placed on Louis, even though he comes to power in 1774. And his country has been bankrupt by bankers who continually loaned him money while they're also loaning the English crown money. And so you have these perpetual wars, which are funded by all this debt, and it's just piling up and piling up. But you have to take the money because the other side is taking the money in the form of debt. And they're building up their army, and they're going to overcome you. So you have to take the money so you can build up your army and continue to have France independent, right? So you're going to see these superpowers, these wars that are almost endless funding from these bankers, but the bankers are going to then own the country. You're going to see the rise of the East Indies and West Indies companies. These are coming out of the Netherlands, okay? The Dutch Republic, the first Dutch Republic, which broke away from Spain, which was all these bankers, the birthplace of capitalism. And they're going to have these private companies, and you're going to have private ownership that's secret, and they're going to own stock in it. And they're going to become more powerful than these countries. And the royalty is, these guys are basically going to run all trade. And so the royalty is going to be encouraged, like France, to start investing in certain companies that are going to go over to the New World, and they have these plantations and stuff like that, and they're going to become really prosperous, and they're making a lot of people rich. And that's another thing that Louis did. Not Louis the 16th, I believe it was the 15th. So right before Louis the 16th, invested a whole bunch of money in these American investments, these stock companies, and they went bankrupt or the money disappeared. And so France, again, just continues to lose. I believe from studying this stuff that it was manufactured, that they wanted to bankrupt the country, just like they wanted to shut it down. Like they were going to be, Donald Trump was not allowed to be in. They didn't care what happened to our economy. They're going to destroy it if it helped them get rid of Donald Trump. And that's exactly what's going to happen to Louis. And then Louis the 15th is going to die, and Louis the 16th is going to come. He was a grandchild. He was very young at the time. He was under, I forget when he took power. It was 1774. I don't know his age, but I'm guessing he was under 20. And so he's very young, very inexperienced. His court is just going to continually hamstring him. They're going to encourage him to fund the American Revolution, which is going to further bankrupt France. And then after he listens to them, and they really twisted his arm. I mean, they forced him to fund the revolution. I don't think he wanted to. They manipulated him. They told him it would be this great economic boom for France when it was all played out, and they held back other loans if he didn't fund this revolution. So these revolutionaries were in France. They wanted the American Revolution. These elite bankers and the aristocracy, the Freemasons they had recruited, they wanted the American Revolution. They forced him to fund it, and then it further bankrupted France beyond imagination. Just absolute poverty, starvation, and then they blamed it on the king. And so the people hated them. But this was largely manufactured. Okay, so they got the propaganda, they got the crisis, then the riots start in France. And the riots just can be out of control. They're going to just this bloodlust. When they stormed the Bastille in France, that's the beginning of the French Revolution is considered, right? Bastille Day. They're going to let out the prisoners. They're going to let the criminals right out of the prisons, and they're going to unleash them. And we even saw that this past time. They started saying, well, because of COVID, it's not safe for these criminals to be in the prisons, so they're going to release them. And then a lot of these people ended up in the BLM and Antifa riots because they're violent. They're killers already, and they just let them loose on the people. And that's exactly what they did in the French Revolution. And they committed abominations. They committed rape and genocide. It's just horrible things. They would go into the church and just slaughter the priests. We're going to get into that in a minute. They slaughtered the aristocracy, no restraint. They just let these brutal criminals out and just terrorize the people. Now, after that, there's going to be a war. There wasn't really one in France. There's very little resistance in France. I mean, Louis was so overwhelmed, and so much of the military itself had been corrupted and turned against him. He was just so overwhelmed. There was very little resistance. Then after the war, they always have a reign of terror. They did the same thing in England. The Reign of Terror. They did the same thing in Germany when the Spartacus League took over. They did the same thing in Russia. It wasn't quite as bad in America. America was its own little, it was a little bit different because it wasn't in Europe. But they definitely had a reign of terror in France. And that's where just genocide. And they go out there and they kill all of their enemies. They slaughter everybody they can. Anybody that won't pledge fealty or loyalty to the new order that's taking over, they just slaughter them en masse. And then society, and they pillage their enemy. They just take everything. And then after things are super out of control, then they restore order and they come back in. And I think that's kind of what we have now. They're trying to bring the calm back and restore some order, right? But it was definitely during the French Revolution. Then they ended the Reign of Terror once they had slaughtered all their enemies. They didn't get the property back. They didn't bring the people back to life. It was all done. It was what they wanted. It was accomplished. And then they restore order, and they actually held a lot of these people accountable, like Robespierre. They cut his head off. And then they show the people like, see, we want justice. And these people who committed these abominations, that really wasn't us. That was them. And they restore order. But it works out perfect because it's not an equal playing field anymore. Their enemies have been slaughtered, annihilated, and then they restore order, and there's no opposition. They control everything. They control all the institutions. Those palaces. I mean, this is so funny because those palaces that they used to look at Louis and those guys and say, look at those fine palaces they live in while you guys are starving in the streets. Those palaces weren't divided up among the people. Like, it immediately changed hands and went to the new aristocracy, the new royalty, the bankers, New World Order bankers. Okay, and I just want you to see the nature of this. And I hopefully you'll look this stuff up. I wish I had pictures when I taught these classes. I want you to look up the nature. Because you've been told that, like, for instance, Marie Antoinette, she's this vile person. When the people were starving, she said, let them eat cake. This is all coming from propaganda. And the same people who founded America and write our history are the same people who were participating in the French Revolution, funded the revolution, and they love to portray royalty that way. They love to portray Marie Antoinette that way. Look up the propaganda. It's so vile. It's so over the top. They have pictures of her committing sex acts with animals. They have the most pornographic, filthy stuff. It's beyond the pale. In her trial, they accused her. They even interviewed her children and got her son to testify against her after torturing him for forever. That he had been molested by her and her aunt, when they were sleeping together in the prison. Just the most vile things you can imagine. They hated Marie Antoinette. They hated her. So I don't believe any of it. You know, you read the writings of the people who loved her, of her own daughter and stuff like that. You see a lady of high quality, a very noble lady, a very faithful, very pious lady. But you look at the propaganda and you know these aren't good people. I mean, it's so vile. It's so filthy. It's so disgusting. That you realize these are not good, God-fearing men. These aren't decent people. These aren't just hungry peasants. These are like satanic, possessed, hateful people. They hated the aristocracy. They hated the church. You look at what they did to Princess Lamballe. That was the best friend of Marie Antoinette. And during one of these riots, where basically the people in charge said, "Oh, we can't control it," and they rioted, and they would go to the prisons and they would take out all the prisoners and beat them to death, rape them, the most vile things. They got a hold of the Princess of Lamballe, and she is best friends to the Queen. So when they find her, they're very excited. In fact, they let the prison guards let a lot of the other women go, but they're like, "No, we can't let you two go." And so they saved these women because they were such high. Or notable people. They said they couldn't let him go, but they got a hold of her. They bring her to a courtyard. They strip her. They sexually assault her. There's also kids. There's children. I mean, this is a mob. Think Antifa. They sexually assault her, and then they club her to death. Then they cut off her head, and they bring it to Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette's imprisoned. In the tower, and they bring it and show it outside of her window. They want to show Marie Antoinette just to mock her, just to show how savage they are. That's her best friend. They cut her head off. They've got to show it to Marie Antoinette. That's the kind of people that are running the revolution. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, just a mob, a sick mob. The treatment of little Joseph. So little Louis Joseph, that's the second oldest son. The first oldest son has already died of sickness. They get a hold of this boy. He's 7 or 8 years old, and they just torture him. Eventually, when Napoleon Bonaparte comes to power, they start looking into this, and they actually get rid of Monster Simon. They put someone else in charge of him. They actually try to nurse him back to health, but he's so far gone. Mentally, he's like a zombie, and he's so tormented, so sick. They wouldn't even clean the room of his feces for years. So it's all in there. It's just disgusting. There's bugs crawling all over him. This is a 7, 8-year-old kid, and that's what they did to him. They mocked him every day because he is, technically after his father dies, he is the king. And though he hasn't been coordinated. And so they just torment this kid, and they enjoy doing it. For a long time, Marie Antoinette is alive. And then, of course, the aunt and the sister are alive, and they can hear his screams. They know what's going on. They're torturing this little boy just in the next room. Now, luckily, Napoleon Bonaparte, he's not like a total monster. I used to be a hero of mine. He's on my wall. He's not a total monster. And he actually says, no, let's get him a real doctor. Let's clean this up. It doesn't matter. The kid's so far gone. He's so sick. He hasn't been fed hardly at all for over a year. And he ends up dying, I think, at 10 years old. He passes away. So these people are sick, evil people during the French Revolution. It shows you the spiritual nature. So these aren't just starving peasants. They go into the church, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They cut the heads off of all the statues of the saints and everybody. they tear down the statue of Mary, and then they bring in the new goddess, a whore, the mother of whores. That's what Cicero calls her, the ancient goddess Liberty or Libertas. And at first they didn't have like a statue to bring in. So they just brought whores, literal whores, prostitutes in off the street. These women would dance around basically naked in the church, making a mockery of the whole thing. But they swore allegiance, and they worshiped this new goddess, Liberty, which is now, of course, in New York Harbor. And if you look at the history of this goddess, and I've talked about her before, she doesn't just symbolize liberty. It's not just this, it's like she's an ancient goddess, demonic goddess. She goes all the way back to the time of ancient Israel. And if I remember correctly, she's not the wife of like Baal. Maybe it's Moloch or something, but she's a bad lady. She's called Lucifer by other people. We get confused. We think of them as male and female. They're not, of course. These are demons. But she's known as Venus or Astarte, the star god. And that's where we get the symbol of the star on our flag. And this became a symbol of the liberty movement. The stars became a symbol of the liberty movement. And liberty, that's her sign, the sign of liberty. Cicero calls her the goddess of whores because he believed that temple prostitution originated with her. And she was the god of the slave, so she represented liberty. But she's a really bad lady. She's really gross. King Solomon, ended up betraying God. It says in his final days in the Bible, you read it. It says in his final days, he turned away from God, and he started to worship these other gods. And one of those was Astarte, or Ishtar, or Liberty, or Venus, or Lucifer. That's who that god is. Okay, and they put that up in the temple. It's no longer the Temple of Notre Dame or the Cathedral of Notre Dame. It's the Temple of Reason. It's the cult of reason, and then it becomes the cult of the Supreme Being. These are deists. They're extremely anti-Christian. They hate Christianity. I don't have to get into the Reign of Terror. I think most people know what the Reign of Terror was. It was basically anybody who represented the church at the time. So anybody who would not swear allegiance. Oh, this is where patriotism comes from too. I mean, patriotism was big, of course. The Patriot movement in America, huge over there in France. They were the patriots against the royalists, the clergy. And basically you had to swear allegiance, a pledge of allegiance, which is, there's a history with ours, but you have to swear a pledge of allegiance to the state and the new order. And you have to swear hatred to the king and queen and the church. And even the clergy, at first they just massacre them. They call it the national bath. They take devout Christians and Catholics out to rivers and lakes and drown them during the Reign of Terror. They slaughter the clergy. I mean, you'd see clergy walking down the street. People just see them and run out there and start clubbing them to death. Mary Antoinette's daughter, Mary Therese Charlotte, actually talks about that. She said that a clergy tried to come to her defense after they were captured, and they tried to kill him. Actually, luckily, some of the guards actually protected him that time, but she said that she saw violence all the time. There's another guy, she saw his head cut off. He was a aristocrat. He tried to protect the king from this mob, and they just beat him to death, cut his head off right there. So these are violent people. This is not law and order. This is not poor people. These aren't like patriots defending their country. These are people who hate the royalty and they hate the church. They robbed the church of all of its wealth. Took all of its property, and then they made the preachers, and they did the same thing in the Soviet Union. They had to be paid by the state, and they had to swear allegiance first to the state instead of the church. And then they would be paid by the state. And most of the Christians would reject this, or the Catholics would reject this clergy and say, well, it's not a true clergy. If they've taken the oath, we want nothing to do with them. They've sworn allegiance now to the satanic order. And the same thing happened in Russia. They tried to have the communists in Russia tried to make it state clergy. So the Orthodox priests were basically paid by the state, controlled by the state, and they gave a state message. It's a little bit different in America. It's not as controlled. It's like a free market, New World Order clergy. Some of these mega preachers and stuff like that. We'll get into that, but I mean, they're certainly not preaching Christianity anymore. Some of the other isms that came out of the French Revolution, you're going to know capitalism came out of the French Revolution. The free market, all those ideas started coming out of the French Revolution. Really powerful because these are capitalist merchant bankers who funded this revolution. Believe it or not, you have communism coming out for the common people. Everybody's going to be equal. They even call their first government the commune. And anyway, so it's interesting that those two, they seem polar opposites, but they came out of the same sort of revolution. Patriotism, which I just said, allegiance to the state, this idea of allegiance to the state, the love of the state as the highest being instead of your church, your family. You should sacrifice your church, your family, your king. You love your country, that love of country. This is going to come into conflict later with the communists when, again, they preach these different philosophies at the time. Like, when they have no power, they preach freedom of the press, free speech, free association, the right to bear arms. As soon as they gain power, then they start preaching the opposite. So it's fluid. It's all about power. And so some of these things seem confusing. Like, what do you mean they teach, like, they preach capitalism and they preach communism? Don't these things conflict with each other? Well, it just depends on the moment. Like, when they have no power, they preach to the common people that we're going to take over and we're going to divide everything up and everybody's going to be equal and everybody's going to be happy and it's going to be kumbaya. But as soon as they have power, they're like, no, we actually need this and we should have free capitalism. Look at China today. So essentially, it's not hypocrisy. It's part of the evolution of the tyranny. It's a revolution. They're taking over. They have to make you hate the power and think that you're going to get something better by overthrowing this power. And then when it doesn't happen, then they start preaching the merits of capitalism and stuff like that. And then education, public education. Like I said, like little Louis Charles, they love to educate other people's children. And they teach hatred of the church and they teach hatred of the family and they teach hatred at this time of the monarchy. And that's going to be a big thing that's going to come out of the French Revolution and the American Revolution, this idea of educating other people's children, making them great patriots. And then, I was saying, where did patriotism go wrong? Well, at first they wanted patriotism to overthrow the monarchy, this idea that your love is to your fellow man and your state. And these monarchies represented Christendom, and a lot of them were emperors, so they represented many states. And so they originally were preaching patriotism like, no, we want representation here. You represent us. Like Trump said, America first. That's what the patriots of France were like, America first, France first. And so that was to where it come. But once you have communism and the New World Order, like once they own the state, now they're trying to expand their empire and create a New World Order. So now patriotism is bad. That's out again. And we need a kumbaya, like, internationalism to bring it all together. So originally they wanted to break it all apart, so they preach these things. Now that they have power, they want to bring it all back together, and they want to create like a union. We're all the same, and there's no differences. There should be no borders. They preach something different when Christendom was in power. Now that they're in power, now it's all about restoring the New World Order. Total power. One government. And I always say, so people say, well, where do you get this information? Like, how come I didn't get that? How come when I went to school, I was taught it was about bread and the king and the queen are these villains who are just spending all the nation's money and bankrupting, and they have no regard, and they should be overthrown. Their heads should be cut off, and they were horrible, horrible people, right? They mismanaged the country. And that's the same in every country. Every monarch was accused of this, same propaganda, same everything. When I say, well, I don't read textbooks, which will kind of paint that narrative for you. I go to the original sources. I read the writings of Paine, Thomas Paine, Robespierre, Marat, a horrible man, Marat. He's like a patron saint of the revolution. There was actually a little nice like housewife who went in and stabbed him to death in his bathtub. She was actually a revolutionist. She believed in the revolution, but he was so wicked, and so many of her friends have been denounced by this guy. He had some sort of sickness, so he spent all day in the bathtub in salts and skin disease, maybe psoriasis, I don't remember. But anyway, she said she had some secret information. She was going to denounce some people. So he ushered her in. She pulled out a knife. She killed him. He's like the patron saint of the revolution now. He's a very wicked man. You read his writings and you see these are hateful, satanic, evil people. It's like the face of Antifa today. They're like, love Trump's hate. But you can see they're just seething with their own hate, right? This is who these people are. Marat. You read the writings of Voltaire. You think about Voltaire as this. He's considered the great philosopher of the revolutionary New World Order. Just read some of his writings. He wrote Candide. Just read Candide. It's so filthy. It's so disgusting. It's so vile. It's like the philosophy is so blasphemous that when you get done with Candide, you just sick to your stomach. Read that. Because these are the writings of the revolution. Thomas Paine, these heroes, okay? Read their writing and then compare that to like King Louis, his last will and testimony. We still have that. Just read it. Just compare the difference. You realize when you're reading King Louis's last will and testament, I'm reading a very devout Christian man. The writings of a very devout Christian man. When you read Princess Elizabeth or you read his daughter, I am amazed with his daughter. She's a greater person than me. As a child, she was a greater person than me. She had on her wall, scribbled on her wall, I talk about it in the book. Let me just read this to you. Okay, now this is after she was interviewed and they tried to get her to testify against her mother that she'd been molesting the little brother. This is after they had killed her father. She had taken her mother and her aunt, but she didn't know her mother was dead yet. She's listening to her son be tortured. This is the final chapter in the book. So, this is my favorite section of character, okay? But this is just what she writes. This is the level of the little girl we're dealing with. That the evil, gluttonous, like Louis and Mary Antoinette raised. This is her little daughter. I think at this time she's 12 years old. And she writes, Mary Therese Charlotte is the most unhappy person in the world. She can obtain no news of her mother, nor be reunited to her, though she has asked it 1,000 times. Live, my good mother, whom I love well, but of whom I can hear no tidings. Of my father, watch over me from heaven. O my God, forgive those. Anyway. I shouldn't have done it. I can never do it. I can never read that story. For some reason, it's like, I don't know. Every time. But she basically asks for forgiveness. You're reading, these people are very devout, very Christian, very good people, way better than me. I would be seething with rage if they did that to my family. I read this stuff on the internet today, I seethe with rage. I'm totally ready for a revolution, a Christian revolution in this country. I'm totally ready. I'm a soldier at heart. I don't know how I end up writing children's curriculum and stuff. I'm a soldier at heart. I don't have that in me. We're dealing with very good people. There's a story that is told. I don't know if she wrote it. I forget, but she talks about, I think it was her in her memoirs, this princess, because she survived the revolution. Napoleon traded her eventually. He had no use of her. She could never be king. He trades her eventually. And she writes these memoirs. She talks about how when the country was starving, and there's all this, just this poverty and stuff that her mother brings in, and the toy makers came at Christmas time with all these toys to sell to the queen for Christmas. And she says, to the daughter, she says, and to the children, they say, I would love to buy all this for you because I love you so much. I'd love to buy it all for you. But the country is very poor right now. People are starving, they're hurting. So this Christmas, we can't have any toys. So that's the kind of mother that we're dealing with. But they've made her out to be this vile thing. Just to look at it. Just look it up. Just look it up. Look up the pornographic, filthy propaganda that they smear this family with. And it upsets me because they're doing the same thing to the church today. You think of a priest, you think of a pedophile. They planted that in you. These same bad people, they planted that in your mind. Satanists have infiltrated the church. We'll talk about that with the Freemasons by design. It's just overwhelming, the level of hatred and propaganda that we're dealing with. Just insane, over the top. So, I don't know why that story really bothers me. Maybe it's because when I was writing it and stuff like that, I don't know. It was like I'm just thinking of little Louis Joseph. Oh gosh, I forget the name. But I'm thinking of that, and my son's that same age. I'm like, my God, what if they did that to me? What if they tormented my kid in the next room and tormented, and then made him accuse his mother of these vile atrocities, and then they left him in his own filth, and they mocked him, and they drunk him, and tried to corrupt him, just like those people are singing about when he's 7, 8 years old. Which book? I'm going to post a link if you want to read about the French Revolution from the daughter's perspective. I'll post a link to her writings, her memoirs. If you're talking about this book, this is my book, Character. This is The Art of Raising Children for Greatness, Character. What I just read from was the final chapter in the book. That was on contentment. It's an amazing thing to have contentment, like after living through that. I don't know how you do it. So, anyway, that's it. I can't even talk about the story more. For whatever reason, it always gets me. It makes me very upset. Okay, now, back to the revolution. I've totally lost my train of thought. I don't know why, I swear. I could talk about any other thing, any other atrocity in the world. It doesn't bother me, except I guess when you're hurting little kids like that, it's like, oh, sick. As a father, it just makes me sick. It makes me want to kill people. In a good way. These people who harm children. Jesus says it. He's like, it's better that they just tie a millstone around their neck. Okay, now Lafayette. So I want to bring these things together. So one of the things I'm reading in her memoirs too is she talks about these liberty trees. She said that one of the times they were very angry with her father because her father, I mean, he pretty much rubber stamped everything that they did after they tormented his family, and they got him in prison, and he's in this horrible situation where if he doesn't pass these laws, he knows is going to further destroy him and his family and his country. They're going to torment his family and his country and everyone he loves. So he starts rubber stamping these laws, but one of them he considers sacrilegious. He can't do it. And he's supposed to sign a law. This is the king. He's supposed to sign a law that says that any of the clergy who don't swear allegiance, patriotic allegiance to the state instead of the church, have to leave France. They're exiled from France. And this is when he's like a puppet king still. He's imprisoned, but they're still pretending like he's kind of has like some say in some of this stuff. But he refuses, and so they're so angry with him. And so then they start mocking him. Then they say they want to plant a liberty tree in his garden. And they're like, liberty tree? Isn't that the American Revolution? What does liberty tree have to do with in France? And the daughter talks about how they would also plant the liberty poles everywhere. And the liberty poles had the red, white, and blue stripes. So our colors, they become the colors of France. And they would plant the liberty pole everywhere. And that was to symbolize that we don't need a tree. We'll plant liberty anywhere we go. So they brought their liberty poles. And there's a whole story behind the liberty poles and liberty tree. But you see these parallels, not just in the colors and in the liberty trees, but in the philosophies. Lady Liberty, both movements are going to start swearing fealty and worshiping this Lady Liberty, this idea of reason and knowledge and science over faith and Christianity. And patriots, you're going to start hearing about the patriots, and we're patriots and we love our country first and all this stuff. And that's going to be really trying to gain an allegiance or bring allegiance away from the church and the monarchy. Remember that. Maybe you don't care about the monarchy anymore, but remember this was a Christian monarchy at the time. And also remember that it was to bring allegiance away from the church. That there's going to be a separation of church and state, and your highest loyalty should be to the state, patriotism. And then, of course, they're both funded by merchant bankers. A lot of people would ask about that. It's so hard. It's so boring. Because you hear about the Washingtons and Benjamin Franklins and Napoleon Bonaparte. And you don't realize these were pawns in the game. I mean, Napoleon Bonaparte, we'll get to him in a second. He was one of my heroes for a long time. But then he got put away like a little toy, in time out on an island and exiled at the end of his days. So he went from the most powerful man in the world, supposedly, to being put on a little island when the bankers were done with him. But originally they backed him. It's so funny, too, that Napoleon, came to power right after, so the bankers fund this revolution. It's going to be equality and communism, basically. And then all of a sudden, after all that was done and the anarchy was done and they killed everybody that was, had anything to do with the clergy or aristocracy or even just loyalty. A lot of these were peasants that were slaughtered during these reigns of terror. A lot of them were peasants that just supported their church, supported their clergy, or supported their king or just were loyal to the aristocracy. They were also slaughtered. But after that, they say, okay, now we need to... It was getting scary because you had all the major Christian powers there we go with the thing again, the timers. You have all these other major Christian powers like in Austria and stuff like that and in Russia, and they're like, we better put this thing down. The revolution's already happened in England, so But even England is like, we better put these people down. What is going on? Dude, so annoying. Like I said last week, we use iPads for internet in here. And one way we monitor our kids is we have the text messages go to all the devices so we can watch them on our phone and stuff. And there's never a temptation to do bad text. But anyway, that's annoying that they always beep all the time. So they start gaining momentum. They're like, we got to take France back. We have to restore the monarchy in France. We have to restore the church in France. Like, this evil cannot get out. And so they realize right away, like, we have to order this country. So these bankers, all of a sudden, they fund this no-name, Napoleon Bonaparte. He's just a average soldier he's become a great commanding, officer. He's won some battles. He's got a lot of charisma, and they back him for a while. He unites France, and then he's going to devastate France. He's going to take France to conquer all these other Christian nations, and he's going to do a fantastic job, but he's going to devastate France beyond imagination. But these bankers hate France, okay? They hate France. All right? I don't know. I don't have an analogy right away, okay? But they hate France. They're playing with other people's sons that they hate. So they don't care how many French people die. And Napoleon's just this like warlust general who loves to conquer. So he doesn't really care. They're going to slaughter all the sons of France in these wars, overthrowing their enemies, okay? They hate the Russians. They hate the Austrians. They hate these other Christian empires. They're going to try to overthrow them. They're going to do it successfully. Napoleon's going to win wars against Russia and Austria. And in each of these times, they're going to give up huge portions of land. They're going to give up their land in South America, parts of South and North America. They're going to give up territories, like he's going to conquer Spain, which is his arch rival. And these were all Christian empires. And when they go there, they're going to start to spread liberty. And they're going to promote capitalism, New World Order bankers. And they're going to promote freedom of religion, which we think, oh, that's a great thing. But we'll get into that later and why they did that. But it was basically because the religion was Christianity. And now they're going to start promoting New World Order religions. So in other words, it was to decentralize religion, to overthrow the Christians. And that's what we have today. I mean, we have Satanism being taught in schools now. And you can't argue it because of freedom of religion. So he's going to promote that. He's also going to emancipate the Jews. And a lot of these bankers are Jewish. And they hate the Christian church. And everywhere he's going to... In fact, he was considered a Messiah. Like some people consider him a Jewish Messiah. The Jews were naming their kids after him. But everywhere he's going to go, he's going to emancipate the Jews while he's alive. But eventually the Jewish bankers are going to be done with him. And they're going to kind of make a drug deal with England. You have like the Rothschilds. They're going to make a drug deal with England and Austria and basically say, hey, if you emancipate us over here and let us, kind of marry into the royalty and basically run our banks however we want and gain equality in society, which again, you might think is a good thing, but we'll back you. And so that's what they do. They eventually stab Napoleon in the back. Besides, Napoleon was becoming too powerful. Remember, the bankers are in charge. Napoleon was just their pawn. But he started to become an emperor. The country loves him. They love him. He's a great conqueror for them. And he's starting to appoint his family into the aristocracy. They're actually becoming the new aristocracy. And he's like giving his brother command of Spain. He's creating an empire. They're like, we might lose control of this. Napoleon might become greater than us. And so they back England, Austria, basically the allies against him. He's overthrown. And then they put him on a little island and they make him the emperor of, originally it was Elba. Maybe it was Helena, I forget. He escapes from one and then he gets sent to the other again. And they make him the emperor to kind of mock him and basically show him, hey, you're nobody. And this is so important too, I'm going to mention some more of these people. You're going to find out that a lot of these people like Robespierre, who's basically the voice of the revolution and the reign of terror, right? And you think, oh, he's like such an evil mastermind of this whole thing, but he's going to get his head cut off. They're all going to get their heads cut off. All the leaders of this revolution. And you think, well, wait a second, like who is leading this thing? Like all the leaders are gone. Exactly. There was money behind it, you guys. There were leaders behind it. And they used these people for like Black Lives Matter. That they use that movement and the spokespeople, but those spokespeople aren't in charge. It's the people funding it and orchestrating it. I hope you see that. It's like George Soros maybe. I don't know. I haven't researched that enough. But let's say George Soros wants to fund Black Lives Matter. He funds it. He picks the right people, the leaders of it, and they go out there and they raise hell. But if he gets too out of control, he can always distance himself and he'll leave them out to dry and they'll be dealt with and they'll go to prison like Antifa. They'll go to prison. But you'll never see like George Soros at the front. He's just going to fund it. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And all of these people who you think are the face of the revolution will eventually get their heads cut off. And you have to think, okay, who's leading this thing? Okay, so let's go first Lafayette. Lafayette is one of the great names of this revolution. He's, of course, a great name in the American Revolution, which shows a connection, doesn't it? Because when the American Revolution starts to kick off over here, he leaves. He's an aristocrat in France. He's forbidden by the king, Louis, who ends up funding our revolution, supposedly. He ends up leaving France, coming over here, becoming a general over here, and fighting against the British, okay? Now, we're told it's because he hated the British. Okay, really? But he was a Freemason. And the Freemasons, the entire goal of the Freemasons was to overthrow the church, overthrow the church, and overthrow the king. That's it. So he comes over here, he fights in this revolution. As soon as it's done, he goes back to France, and he helps kick off that revolution. He's actually ends up becoming a jailer of the royal family. And he's supposed to be their friend, but he becomes their jailer. When they flee the country, Louis and his family, they flee the country. He's the one that hunts them down, tracks them down, brings them back. Now, the great thing is, you think, okay, so this guy, he's legit. He believes in the revolution. He's a leader of it. Well, guess what? He has to flee for his life. Lafayette, the great hero of the American and French Revolution, he has to flee the country because they're going to kill him. They want to arrest him. they end up considering him an enemy of the revolution. So once they're done with these people, once they've served their role as an orator, as a warrior of the revolution, they can't have them becoming too powerful, too popular. Think term limits, okay? Term limits are really important. We're sold that. Recently, Ted Cruz and Ocasio-Cortez were selling term limits. And we think that's the answer because, no, that's not the answer. That's their answer, the New World Order answer. They want to make sure that we don't have one person in power. They can siphon off their power because you could, like a Trump. He might get elected over and over and over, and then his family, and he might become a new Mark. So they have to make sure that these people who become too popular, too powerful, that they're eliminated. So Lafayette, he's a Freemason. He's a true revolutionary. He fights an American Revolution. Then he goes back and fights in the French Revolution. He helps write the Declaration of the Rights of Men and of the Citizen. And Thomas Jefferson helped him. So Thomas Jefferson is involved in the French Revolution. They're helping frame like the kind of constitution, which is called the Declaration of the Rights of Men and of the Citizen. That's Lafayette is writing this. So you think, gosh, he must be a founder. He must want to be one of the key heroes of the revolution. But again, eventually he has to flee France because they come after him because he became too popular and too powerful. So in other words, he's not the leader. He's a pawn. He's a pawn in the game. He had no real power. That's Lafayette. Thomas Paine, we know Thomas Paine, he wrote Common Sense. He's a great hero. I can't believe Christians, like, they let their kids read Common Sense and they consider, and too many Christians believe, and we'll get into this in a minute, that the American Revolution was Christian. I believe that my whole life. I used to debate people about it. I used to know all about it, all the answers, all the places where they talk about the divine and the creator and all that stuff. It's just not true. And Thomas Paine is, if you get past Common Sense and you look into his later writings, he absolutely hates Christianity and organized religion. He is... He's a deist, but he's more of an atheist, and he hates the church. But he is one of the great spokesmen of the American Revolution, right? And the French Revolution. And he's not even from either country. He actually is from England. So he's an Englishman. This is an international movement, you guys. He's a Freemason. This is a Freemason revolution. One revolution that toppled all these countries. These are not individual revolutions. So he's going to leave England. He's going to come to America. And he's going in 1774. He's 2 years before our revolution, and he is the propaganda arm. He's invited by Benjamin Franklin. How do they know each other, these Freemasons? So he's invited over, and of course, Benjamin Franklin has a printing press, which can print free and clear. And Thomas Paine he's going to publish Thomas Paine's work. Thomas Paine is a great orator, a great propagandist, a great writer of the New World Order revolutionary movement. So he's going to come over there, and he immigrates to the U.S., or not the U.S., but America in 1774, helps Benjamin Franklin, and he betrays his own country. So he's actually English, remember, patriotism. He's English, but he's backing our revolution, the American Revolution. And then he's going to join the French Revolution. So once we're done here, he actually, I believe, goes back to England for a while, and then the French Revolution kicks off. He goes over there. He becomes a propagandist for the French Revolution. Remember these people who are beating the brains out of Christians in France, that revolution? He's a part of that. And he was only like the author of the chief propagandist of the American Revolution. It's the same revolution, guys. That's Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine survives the French Revolution because he's English. And he wasn't really a threat. He never gained very much power during the French Revolution, so he survived. Okay, and of course there was no really a threat because in America, because after they set up the government, they set up term limits, they set up this kind of democratic republic system, so they're not too worried. Basically about losing power. So it's not like they had to off Washington. He himself set term limits and rejected being a king, didn't want to become a king. So he was a good leader for them. Okay, Louis Philippe II, never forget that. Louis Philippe II. This guy is the ultimate traitor. In fact, in my book, I talk about the power of loyalty. Loyalty is so powerful. So many times you watch a movie or something like that, it looks like when you stab somebody in the back, that's power. There's this book, 48 Laws of Power, and it's all about this backstabbing, this evil. And I talk about how true power is in the virtues, in the loyalty. And we see that in King Louis and his family, this unity and this unwillingness to denounce each other. It's super powerful. That's not Louis Philippe. Louis Philippe is a playboy. He's actually really evil aristocracy. Everything that you hate about Marie Antoinette, you think she's a degenerate, playgirl spending the money. No, that's not. They're devout, pious, Christians. This guy, Louis Philippe, he's a Freemason. He is all of those things that they hate. And guess what? They welcome him into the revolution. He's one of the heroes of the revolution until they cut his head off. Louis Philippe is the cousin. He's actually next in line. So if King Louis dies, and then he had no sons, this would be the king, Louis Philippe. So Louis Philippe, he's a degenerate. The Freemasons basically get him to open up. They get him really indebted. He's so indebted. They keep loaning him money, and he owes them so much money that they say, well, basically, the only way you can pay us back is if we can kind of operate our commerce out of your home. And so they basically turn one of his homes into a brothel. And the home, because he's such a powerful person, is protected from like the authorities. So they run their operation out of his house. They set up like a brothel, and he gambles all of his money away and all his fortune away. And then they tell him, they say, hey, if you help us in this revolution, like all we care about, we're not really hate the church or the monarchy. All we really care about is we want a constitutional monarchy. We want some say in it, and we'll make you the king. If when you come to power, you turn it into a constitutional monarchy. That's what they tell him. So they seduce him. He sells his soul. He joins the Freemasonry movement. And he actually leads the infamous Women's March. That's why when they said there was the Women's March in D.C. against Trump and stuff like that, that has historical significance. A bunch of hags. These are mean, mean ladies. They used to work in they said like on the wharf, like they were fish ladies, basically. They help bring the fish and butcher the fish and stuff. They get these pikes, and there's these savage ladies, and they walk like, I think it's like 20 miles to Versailles. They show up there, and they weren't ready for him, King Louis, and they end up taking him prisoner. And these women, I mean, the daughter of Louis, Charlotte, Mary Therese Charlotte, she actually writes about how vicious these women were and how insulting and nasty they were. They were even worse than the men, some of them, just evil ladies. That was the original Women's March. Louis Philippe II leads this. And some people later, actually, the commune will accuse him of trying to kill the king at that time. They're going to blame it on him, saying that he had ambitions to be the king. And so he was actually the bad guy who mistreated his cousin, and he did. But anyway, he becomes totally indebted to them. They totally control him. He leads the march, and he actually funds it. So they actually start getting him to fund a lot of this stuff because he's not really, they don't keep tabs on him, the king and stuff, because it's his cousin. And he becomes good friends. He's good friends with Lafayette, that other aristocrat that came to America, fought in both wars, had to flee. They're good friends. He is eventually accused of trying to kill the king. So they were going to try him, but Lafayette protected him. Was like, wait, like, and protected him the first time. But the second time he was accused of and this guy's so dumb, Louis Philippe. He did everything to try to show the satanic Masonic New World banker order that he was one of them. He even officially changed his name to Equality, Mr. Equality. It wasn't enough. They accused him of treason and cut his head off. And why? Because they had to, because he was part of the royal line, and he could become a figurehead and siphon power from these bankers. So, of course, they cut his head off after they use him. So he was not a leader of the movement. Okay, he was a pawn in the game. Okay. You have to know the name Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt, if you've ever heard of the Illuminati, this is the guy. This is the guy who founded the Bavarian Illuminati. I told you this is a world revolutionary movement. It's the same movement. He founds the Bavarian Illuminati. He recruits out of the Freemasons and founds the Bavarian Illuminati, tries to kill the king of Bavaria, tries to overthrow him. They say it's an act of God, but basically one of like his messengers carrying like the documents to like overthrow the government gets struck by lightning, and they discover these documents, and Adam Weishaupt flees the country. He ends up in Germany. Germany's going to be like a hub of revolutions because even though there's a king, there's all these different princedoms and stuff that are all fighting for power. And so a lot of these guys are going to welcome these revolutionaries. And then he helps organize the French Revolution. So these guys are all intermixed. And then Thomas Jefferson sings his praises. Adams actually accuses Jefferson of being part of the Illuminati later. And he sings the praises of Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati. This is a real organization. They were definitely part of the French Revolution and the American Revolution. The Illuminati, by the way, was founded in 1776, the Bavarian Illuminati. So that year is famous. So when you see it on the money and we declared independence, like some people think, well, maybe it means something else. Because that's the year the Bavarian Illuminati was founded. And helped organize the French Revolution. So that's Adam Weishaupt. Then you got Robespierre. He was the orator, the great Obama, like the orator, great speaker, very articulate, savage, vicious, wicked man, full of hate. He knew the king when they were younger. He had met the king and stuff, and he just hated him. So envious of the king, wanted his blood. This guy killed so many people, so many good Christians, slaughtered them, vicious man. And then the best thing was when the Reign of Terror was like out of control now, and they wanted to like bring it in. They've killed everybody they need to kill. They've killed the king. They killed all his family. They killed all the aristocracy. They killed all the clergy. And now they want to bring it back into order. And this guy seems like the natural head of the movement. Everybody thinks he's in charge, Robespierre. Everybody fears him. It looks like this guy is going to be like the president. I mean, he should be it. Well, they just cut his head off. And because he's such a good orator, I love it. It's justice. When they take him down, they blow his jaw off. They take a gun and blow his jaw off. So he can't talk because he's such a powerful orator. They're afraid he's going to say something and like turn the mob at his own execution. They're going to cut his head off. They're afraid he's going to like talk and say something and turn the mob against them because they realize this is a powerful dude. So they blow his jaw off so he can't say anything. And then they cut his head off the next morning, like immediately. There's no trial. They just killed this guy. Too powerful. Pawn. They had to do away with him. Then you got this famous guy, Marquis de Sade. I think it's Sade in French, Sade, but it's spelled S-A-D-E. Hope you know that. It's called sadomasochism. Sadomasochism. This guy is a lunatic. He's a rapist. He originally gets in trouble. King Louis, this guy's part of the aristocracy. He's a Freemason. And he's so wicked, so degenerate, King Louis imprisons him. So he's going to hate Louis, okay? And he basically writes pornographic novels, blasphemous pornographic novels. Like in his I think he wrote like 120 Days in Sodom, and he writes like this story. I think it's Janice or Janice or something. I don't remember. Justinian, something like that. But it's about this little girl who basically like goes to all these places and is raped and tortured. And of course, he hates the church. He's satanic, purely satanic. He hates the church. So in lots of the places, it's the monks who rape her while they're worshiping Jesus. He raped a girl while, he basically invented sex blasphemy, which is very big in the occult, where basically you bring things in that represent the church or the host. It used to be the Eucharist, right? The bread the Catholics take, they bring that in to their sex orgies and stuff. This guy was mainstream, by the way. His books are still out there. He was a total very disgusting person. He was such a perverted, so wicked. He invited a maid off the street to like work in his house, and he raped her. Kept her prisoner for a long time and tortured her and raped her. Really a sadomasochist, very sick. He gets put in a prison, then he gets put in a mental institution. But if you're just that evil, after the French Revolution, they let him out and he becomes a hero and he starts promoting prostitution. He said that really if there was free prostitution and he could like live out his fantasies and pay for it, that it would lessen sex crimes and stuff. He becomes a hero. They actually put him on the general council. He becomes a lawmaker of the French Revolution. And that makes sense. If you look at the LGBTQ movement, you can see like they're all about perverts. I mean, they love to put perverts in places of power, and that's what they do. This guy is satanic, evil, filth. You can look him up. He is one of the heroes of the revolution. He survives because he's just such a degenerate. They just can't cut his head off, and he's not really powerful because everybody thinks he's a lunatic. He actually ends his life in a mental institution, and that was his end. So they didn't actually have to kill him. He had no real power. He's just a real pervert, really disgusting. But the LGBTQ movement, I would say, starts with him. That movement. I'm saying it's ancient. It goes back to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But like he reestablishes the LGBTQ movement, which is just free sex. Free sex with anything, with everything. There's no boundaries, no Christian modesty, morality. Okay, you got Mary Wollstonecraft. She survives, don't worry. She becomes a little disingenuous about the Reign of Terror, a little disheartened with the French Revolution. When you hear about these people, it's, how could you tell? I know. And most people admit the French Revolution was, it got out of hand, or it was bad. But they think it started with these bread riots and stuff. They don't realize that the same people who did that to America. And and we see it come to fruit today. We have the LGBTQ movement. It's one continuous movement. They just had supreme power. They couldn't pull that off in America because most of the people here were still devout Christians. I mean, you had the Puritans. They were radical. They loved to cut the heads off kings. Like the Christians or the Puritans were really radical. But they still loved Jesus. So you're never going to get away with that. It's actually, you wouldn't say it's a miracle. There needs to be like a term for when it's like a satanic miracle or something. But it's like an evil miracle, what happened in France, because the country was like 90% Catholic at the time. And yet they're burning down Catholic churches. They're slaughtering the clergy. You think, how did they get this much power? And you look at America today, like supposedly half this country is conservative, yet these Antifa, these BLM, they have such power. And they get away with it. And you think, man, and like the liberals in this country, you think like, how do they have so much power? Like it's supposed to be 50-50, but we always lose no matter what. Well, they had restrained power during the French Revolution. So you really got to see what they were, and they went straight for the kill. I mean, they went straight to sadomasochism and blasphemy sex and just the occult and horribleness. Yeah, if you study the French Revolution, you know it's evil. It's not a bunch of hungry people just wanting fed. It's satanic to the core. Mary Wollstonecraft, of course, she's considered the mother of feminism. And this was another ism born out of the French Revolution, the mother of feminism. She preaches the death of the family. The family is basically patriarchy, which is true, by the way. They did believe in patriarchy. The Bible talks about patriarchy. Our religion, Christianity, is a patriarchal religion. A father figure is God. That we believe that the father is put at the head of the house for the benefit of his family. We believe in order. They believe in equality, that everything should be leveled, that there should be no higher order except for money. If you want to get to it, they worship. You can't serve God and mammon, right? They're the money men of Jesus' time. So you read her writing. She preaches the death of family, that all family is tyranny, and that the population should be governed, basically communism is what she preaches. That was originally feminism, was just communism, and free sex, because they believe that women's body was like property, and all that kind of crap came out of that. And so free sex, she should be allowed to have sex with whoever she wants, whenever she wants. Don't worry, evil people always have a bad end, and she does survive the revolution, but she's very mistreated by men. She tries to sleep around and all this stuff, but in the end, she's very lonely, very depressed, ends up with her only daughter. Mary Shelley, named after her, Mary Shelley. So Mary was her daughter. Mary Shelley, of course, wrote Frankenstein, and this is all the same people, guys. So that's Mary Wollstonecraft, founder of feminism, came out of the revolution. And feminism, of course, kind of belief. Feminism has always been not about equality for women, but about war on women and the family. They hate the family, feminists. They hate babies. They want to murder them, abortion. They want to liberate women to go into the workplace, start creating GDP. Mary Wollstonecraft talks about the housewife. Mothers are basically worthless. I mean, they hate women. They're worthless. They don't produce anything for the nation. They don't fight. They don't lead. They're worthless because they don't value motherhood at all. So these are, when you think of feminism, just think of anti-mother. They hate mothers. They hate children for the most part. And that's why they're willing to kill them. It's all about, freedom, I guess. Okay, another guy, big name, Bonaparte. You can see him on my wall. My wife bought this for me a long time ago. The other guy is George Washington. These are both heroes of mine. I have George Washington praying. I feel silly now. I feel silly. I got the famous painting of him praying. And then I got Napoleon. I actually like Napoleon in some ways. I think he was an upstart. He came from nothing. He wanted to be great. I like that at him. He was a great general. His men loved him. He was a great leader. He actually showed a lot of mercy to even the leftover aristocrats. He kind of welcomed the church back in. But of course, he was a New World Order guy. He was funded by New World Order bankers. And one of these ceremonies was so important. Remember, they wanted equality. It was all about equality and freedom. You didn't think you'd get an emperor like a few years later. But they put an emperor in power to organize and go after these other guys, the other nations, right? But there's this famous scene, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte. He invites the Pope back, and he's going to crown himself emperor. And he wants the Pope to crown him, or that was what they thought. And the Pope was going to basically recognize him as king. And then Napoleon was going to start lightening up and stop slaughtering the clergy. But it's a very interesting scene. So I believe this is in Notre Dame Cathedral, I don't remember for sure. But he takes the crown from the Pope, and he puts it on his own head. He's going to crown himself. In other words, separate your church and state. I have no fealty. I have no allegiance to the church. I am my own emperor. He's the New World Order emperor. This happens in the 1800s. I told you there's a 1,000-year reign of the church and state in England, or in Europe, starting with the Frank Charlemagne in 800, and then you go to about 1800, and Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the emperor after a 1,000-year reign of church and state union. Now Napoleon Bonaparte shows the world no longer. It started in France, it ended in France. He will crown himself. He's his own emperor. But he's not. He's a banker emperor, and when he falls out of favor with the bankers, they put him on a little island to play emperor over there, kind of as a mockery, and then they get on ruling the world. So that's Napoleon Bonaparte. Of course, he was a Freemason. He had a meteoric rise. So we think these people, they have these celebrities. We think, my goodness, they just shot up to stardom. They're so famous and so brilliant. We look up to these people. It's banker strings. They find a little Britney Spears. She's cute. She's talented. She's a great singer. They make her great. They fund her. They make her great. And when they're done with her, they can break her. And you see this in Hollywood a lot. These people have spoken out. They become Christians. They try to speak out. They get broken. They get cut off. They get destroyed. They get accused of heinous things. And by the way, in the French Revolution, this is like standard operating procedures of the revolutionaries is false accusations. J'accuse. They They love false accusations. They accuse their enemies of all sorts of horrible things. They're doing it in our society today. It's part of the liberal movement. They go into stores and claim that they were abused. You had lesbians, spraying swastikas on their own roof. And then the media is like, oh, look at social supremacy and all this horrible stuff. That's what they do in the French Revolution. That's who these people are. They make people and they break people. And they can destroy these people with false accusations in an afternoon if you don't kowtow to the New World Order. These are very powerful capitalist merchant bankers. And I really think it's interesting because so many of these famous names of the revolutions, they were killed. They weren't the leaders. They ended up they lost everything. And it's not just ironic justice. It's to show they weren't really ever in charge. They were used. They were pawns in the game. This entity has no morality. It's all about power. Freemasonry is not about equality. It has a hierarchy. And you serve that hierarchy. And when you're not useful anymore, they will destroy you. So, okay. Let's see. Okay, now I want to kind of bring this home, guys. I know I didn't probably prove anything tonight. This is just kind of a ramble. I just put together some notes like right before I started talking, and I'm all over the place. I'm all sweaty. I just want to bring it home. I want you to start seeing the world a different way. I want you to start seeing this as one revolutionary movement. It's ongoing, and it's satanic. And when you look at what's going on today, you think you have a president, we have 3 branches of government, and do you really think Biden is your president? Do you really think that Biden even knows where he is? I mean, he's on the verge of, he looks like he's going senile. He looks like he has some sort of dementia or something like that. And yet they put him in the highest, supposedly the most powerful man in the world. And yet you see him sometimes being led around, okay? These are not the people in charge. Obama was nothing. Obama is not the horrible, evil person. He's a spokesperson. He's a pawn in the game. George Washington. I love George Washington. I still look up to him. I love a lot of things about him. He actually spoke kind of against the French Revolution. He was a pawn in the game. There's no reason to believe he was a Christian. I've tried to. I used to try to prove it so hard. I used to debate it with people. There's just very little evidence. The guy didn't take communion. He hardly ever went to church. In his speeches, sometimes he kind of talks about God or the Grand Architect or something like that. But the Freemasons or Satanists, they also say the same thing. Hardly ever talks about Jesus. But anyway, I still look up to him. But he was a pawn in the game. He was their general. He was a great statesman. People respected him, so they used him for that. But the real power, and people try to warn you, they say, follow the money, follow the money. The real power is in the money. That is the New World Order. It's these bankers who run it. I don't know all their names. I can get you some of the names of the bankers and stuff, but there's almost no information. It's so interesting because there's this guy, when the Glorious Revolution happened, right? You know all about William of Orange. You know all about him and his glorious rise, and he's a butcher, and he's this, you know everything about him. Like books and books have been written about William of Orange. William of Orange was nobody. When he invaded England, he had no army. There was a banker. His name was Francisco Susoso, something like that. His actual name was like Abraham Israel or something. I don't know. You have to look it up. But he was a Jewish New World Order banker. And he gave. There was no obligation. He just said, basically, if you win over there in England, pay me back. We'll start a New World Order bank, like a national bank. Pay me back if you win. But if you don't win, no big deal. Okay, no big deal. He furnished an armada that was like twice the size of King James of England. And King James had to flee. Think about that. Think about that kind of money. They can be like, hey, here and that devotion. These are scary people. They want you to believe they just care about money and profit. These are satanic people. They're devoted to their church of Satan. They're extremely evil, and they do believe in it. I mean, they actually believe in it. It's not about profit. I wish the capitalists, these bankers, only cared about profit because we could work with that. Profit isn't evil. Like we could work with that, but they don't. He put all that money up. In fact, the banker Solomon. Or Haynes Solomon, who funded the American Revolution, or was one of the financiers of the American Revolution, he put up the money too and didn't care if he lost it. So they actually believe in this, okay? They wanted to overthrow these governments. But I looked him up, Francisco Susoso, you can look him up too. You know, I think on his Wikipedia page there's like this much information. He's basically a blip in history. You almost know nothing about him. He's insignificant. He's boring. And yet he funded the revolution. He had that much money, more money than the nation, more money than King James. And it was no big deal. He just gave that money to William of Orange. And then William of Orange becomes the spokesman, the one you remember, either the villain or the hero, however you look at it. That's the headpiece. But it's a puppet, if that makes sense. The money's controlling these people. So that is all I want to say, and it's no different in America. I don't believe we have a president. I don't know about Trump. I have mixed feelings about Trump, but like the Bushes, the Clintons, these are nobodies. I mean, these are puppets. These are pawns in the game. In my opinion, you have to follow the money, and the problem is this is very secret. They started the stock companies to hide their identity, so that they could buy up companies and influence them own, but their money would do their talking for them, and you wouldn't know who these people are. They've tried to keep kind of in the shadows as much as possible. You very rarely see these people come out of the shadows and make great speeches. They hire people, better speakers to do their speaking for them. And that way, when that person falls or needs to be removed, they can wash their hands of it. And they did that to many, many, many people. And we're suffering in America today. We have no government. We have no representation. When you hear about those term limits, just remember the French Revolution. Remember what they do to their heroes. There's a reason. They don't want to ever have a man who gets into power, who's so popular, that both sides vote for him multiple times. They have to have a term limit. You can only have your president twice. Because if you could have your president for life, he might start to represent you. He might realize he has a future in this. He wants to build this great nation. You know, that's what a monarchy was in some sense. Like, that he was his people. If he got overthrown, he lost everything. Like, he represented them. These bankers don't care. They'll move their money. They'll back our enemies. They'll make a profit either way. They have no allegiance. They're international. They have an international order that they swear allegiance to. So it doesn't really matter what happens. You know, in World War II, they didn't care how many Americans died fighting those wars. They made money on both ends of it. And it furthered their cause because it overthrew, in World War I, it overthrew Russia, their arch enemy. It overthrew Germany. Like, I'm not saying Hitler. I mean, in World War I, Germany was overthrown. And the Kaiser, the emperor of Germany, was overthrown, had to flee, had to abdicate. So they used American money. They don't care. They don't have any allegiance to America. They're New World Order bankers. These are savage people. Think of abortion. They've murdered billions and billions and billions of babies around the world. They funded these revolutions. It's all the same revolution. So they're very wicked people. Very, very wicked people. Anyway, I'm probably done, guys. Finding history. Everybody's like, well, where do you read this stuff? What textbook? There are no textbooks. I've looked and looked. Nobody knows this stuff. There's nothing. Because even I go to the Christian homeschool conventions and they have the same textbooks. It's like, the difference was like, the liberals are like, George Washington was a great man, except for now because he owned slaves and they're trying to like redo that order. But for a long time, they're like, he was a great man. He was a deist, a liberal, one of us. And the Christians were like, no, he was one of us. But they both agreed like he was a great man and he was the founder of this country and stuff like that. There's no history. The only way you can get this stuff is finding original sources. Yeah, we are downloading some of these videos, Fritha, and eventually I want to teach these with pictures and do an actual class for people because I want you to see these images and these names. I want you to see Francisco Susaso. Look up his name and remember it because he's the real player. William of Orange is his puppet. He's an actor. He's dramatic. He's good. He's memorable. He's exciting. He's evil. He's memorable, but I want you to see the money behind it. You have to see Francisco Susaso. He funded that revolution. There would have been no revolution without him. Okay, these are superpowers. You think of the Japanese Imperial Navy and the kamikaze fighters. They were nothing. Japanese was like a third world country. It was a tiny nothing empire. Until a banker named Jacob Schiff, who wanted to overthrow the Japanese, gave them a military. Like loaned them money for a military. They have a monument to this banker. But you've never heard of Jacob Schiff. But you know all about the Japanese imperialism in World War II and the dastardly attack on Pearl Harbor. You don't realize like that was funded. They funded the Japanese to take down Russia and the Chinese, to overthrow those countries. And then we took down Japan in World War II. So at any rate, yeah, I'm going to start teaching this. You have to get a hold of source material. I'm starting to put source material slowly. It's in the library at Blue Man Academy under documents. For example, Christopher Columbus, the genocidal maniac who killed all the Indians and was racist and pedophile and slave trade. Like, okay. Like, here's the source documents. Here's his journal. See if you can get that out of reading that. See if you can get that narrative, that New World Order narrative that was written by, I think, Zell, that communist who wrote The People's History of America, that all these liberals quote. On all the blogs, it's all regurgitation of that communist book. And see if you can get that from a source material. See if you can read Marie Antoinette, her daughter's writings, Mary Therese Charlotte. See if you can read that writing and think that she was the bad guy. Think that they weren't devout Christians who love Jesus like we love Jesus. See if you can get that narrative, that they're the bad guys and that the revolution's good. You have to see the propaganda. You have to see the pornographic propaganda. It's horrible, but you have to see who these people are that were saying these things about Marie Antoinette accusing her. Do you actually believe that she molested her little boy? Because he slept in the bed with them? Because he didn't sleep on the floor in the prison? Like he slept with the aunt. He was 7 years old. He slept with the aunt and mother. And they accused them of molesting him because they had sold the propaganda that Marie Antoinette was a sex fiend. She was a violent pedophile, lesbian, incestual, whatever. That they needed that so you could hate her. So they pumped that propaganda out there to make the people hate her. But you read her writings, you read Louis' writings, you don't see this stupid, arrogant playboy king. You read his last will and testament. Read it. I think I put it on Blue Manor Academy. Read his last will and testament and tell me that wasn't a great man. At any rate. But you have to find source material. And I'm sorry, Christian homeschool world, it's all like liberty doctrine wrapped into Christianity as if they're the same thing. And many Christians believe that Christians founded this nation. I was one of them. I believed my whole life. I used to debate it. I used to dig for this stuff. It got really hard because I couldn't find hardly anything. Occasionally they'd be like deist or whatever, but no, I don't believe so. I think there were a lot of good Christians here at the founding of this nation. I think we had a tremendous influence. We certainly weren't the French Revolution because we were too Christian for that, to let that crap happen here. And they didn't want that either. They wanted to destroy France. They hated France. But over here, we were already the rebels. They saw this as their home. And anyway, it was a totally different situation. So anyway, that's it, guys. If you have other questions, leave them below. I will start teaching this stuff more thorough with actual classes and stuff like that. I want to teach this on Blue Manor. It's so important your kids know this stuff. Then it starts to make sense. The LGBTQ movement was from the beginning. These Freemasons were part of it. It was part of their cult. And it goes back to the Glorious Revolution. It goes back to the French Revolution. And all these wars are strung together, financed by the same people. It's the same movement, the same order. And you see that, like Hungary today, right? Hungary the other day, they're being attacked, and so is Russia, for not allowing homosexual propaganda to minors. Now, if it was just about democracy and representative government, then they should be allowed to do that, right? But it's not. And who was doing it? The UN, the New World Order government that they pieced together. Was it the UN or the European Union? I forget which one. But they said that Hungary will be punished for not promoting the LGBTQ agenda. Think about that, okay? That's who these people are. They promoted feminism and abortion everywhere they go in all these countries. It's all tied together. It's not like the Chinese were like, hey, we need abortion. And the Japanese and the Russians and everybody at the same time is like, we need abortion. This was a one world movement, revolution. Feminism happened in all the countries at the same time. It's all the same doctrines, all the same revolutions, and everywhere they go, they massacre the Christians. They hate us. And it's very scary. It is very scary because we know what they're capable of. But they say free speech. Yeah, and see, that's what you can't get caught up with, the free speech and the freedom of religion. That's all garbage. They never believed in free speech. They did that to Louis. They're like, what are you afraid of? We just want to be able to talk about issues and publish our newspapers. And what are you afraid of, Louis? So Louis grants him, I don't think it was Louis, I think it was his father, but grants him freedom of the press. And immediately they start printing off this like pornographic like propaganda. And Louis is like, shouldn't we shut this down? Like, they have like dogs licking my wife's privates. Like, that's who these people are. Sick, vile stuff. And his advisors are like, oh no, you'll just make it worse. Like, they'll just let this die out. No big deal. But it was a big deal. They made the people hate her, hate his wife, with freedom of speech. Now, did they believe in it? No, only the stupid people believed in it. Like, the revolutionaries believed in it. Like, the stupid people, like the Robespierres, like, they believed in it, right? Until the Reign of Terror. And then the Reign of Terror happened, and all of a sudden, they started preaching the merits of censorship, because we can't have people propagandizing against the revolution. So now they preach the merits of censorship because they're in power. So they never believed in it. And now in America, they try to like do this two-faced hypocrisy. Like, we believe in freedom of speech, but not hate speech. And hate speech is anything that doesn't agree with the New World Order's philosophy. Climate change is hate speech now. If you disagree with climate change, it's hate speech because you could kill millions of people with that. But abortion is not hate speech, even though it kills millions of people. See the game? They don't believe in free speech. I don't either anymore. I don't think the Bible taught that. I don't think the Bible taught that. I think that the Bible taught intolerance of evil. You look at the Old Testament, even the New Testament, you look at the Christian kings, there was intolerance of evil. If you allow evil, if you tolerate evil, it will thrive and it will not reciprocate your tolerance. It will kill you. It will destroy you. That's always where it goes. It's destroying millions of babies because we tolerated evil. Millions of babies in this country die every year because we tolerated evil. And now we're on the ropes. And now we're like, hey, what about freedom of speech? Don't be stupid. Don't be naive. They don't believe in that. They only believed in it when you were in power. Okay? And the only way we get out of this is fight our way out of it. And that's what Blue Manor Academy is about. We're about raising champions. We're about raising powerful people to take these people down. I hope it can be done. So anyway, guys, hope you got some out of that. It's not always about education, but it's so important you know the history. Get to those documents. Read my books. There's a lot of history in these books. Even though it's about character, there's a lot of those stories about the French Revolution and about great heroes that you've never heard of and villains that you've never heard of. Read those books. Read Revealing School. I really unveil a lot of the propaganda and how they do that. They teach it in the public schools. You'd be surprised. But once it's revealed, you can never go back. I mean, so many people said, I was almost going to quit homeschooling, and then I read your book, and like, I'll never go to school again after you read that book. Like, you will be immune, and then you can spread it. And it's like in Dorothy, Dorothy, like the man behind the curtain. Like once you see the man behind the curtain, you can never unsee it. And you'll know who they are, and we can take them down once you understand their tactics. So, like critical race theory, you guys, like you recognize that in your time. The critical race theory is propaganda, and it's horrible and it's hateful. In your time, you don't understand. They've written like 700 versions of critical race theory, and you bought all of them up to this point. And one of those was that like all the founding fathers were Christians, like because the population at the time needed to believe that because they were pretty Christian, like the Puritans and stuff. They were pretty Christian people, so they need to believe that. But we've bought so many lies, and we have to start unwrapping these lies. We don't just reject critical race theory. Unwrap it all. Go all the way back to the beginning, and remember that we have allegiance to one God and one church, and we should never tolerate evil. And that was probably the first lie: is we should tolerate evil. And it's overwhelmed us. All right, guys. I will see you next week. Talk to you later. Bye.